Good evening and welcome back. We're just waiting for people to join us for overtime on Pellowe Talk Live tonight. And we've just sent the panelists their email links so they'll be able to jump in as quick as possible. But we're just starting the live stream super quick so that viewers can jump in and as soon as they see that the live stream has resumed. So we're just waiting and kicking back. And there's a whole lot going on. I'm just going to share the screen of what's going on. And here we go. So this is a whole lot of fun. 8 police officers. I think I said in the previous live stream that there was only 7. But no, it actually takes 8 police officers surrounding a homeless woman sitting on a park bench in Melbourne. She was not socially distancing properly. So, yeah, a little bit ridiculous. Welcome back, Bernard.
G'day, Dave. We're back on live?
We are. This is live, and we've got 7 people watching already.
Okay. Look, I can't stay too long. I've got to leave in about 20 minutes.
That's okay. We won't be forever. This is the casual coffee and Coke and any kind of spirits you might happen to be lucky enough to be mixing that with right now. Although I actually don't have any cups with me.
No, either do I.
If you've joined in from the previous stream, jump on the comments and tell us what you would like us to talk about, what you'd like us to address straight away. What are your thoughts? Have we gone too far? I saw a poll today shared by somebody credible, and this poll was basically saying that only 7% of Australians think we've gone too far, that the restrictions on our liberty and freedom to battle COVID have gone too far. Only 7% of people think that. Welcome back, Marcus, and also Senator Malcolm Roberts. We're already going live just to make sure that viewers had something to click on as quick as possible. Probably should have warned you of that just in case you were coming on with a beer in one hand or something. But welcome.
Hey, Bernie, did you negotiate with Dave about getting double time for overtime? So what's 00 again?
That was yesterday.
We'll have to talk to our union, Malcolm.
And then it will go the way of the car industry. We'll have a whole lot of outsourced cheap labour. Welcome back, James. We're already live. We've already got comments and questions. So Eli Wintercross has said, what excellent use of police resources. Look, I love Victoria Police. They were very helpful to me when I had a violent mob, without exaggeration or hyperbole, outside a Conservative event that I organised. And they're, champions. But I don't, I love police generally, but I'm seeing some really ugly behaviour from them lately. Cato Bailey says, in the Bega Valley, police find a guy eating a kebab on a park bench, but it was dismissed, thankfully. I think I remember that one. And if I remember, I think he was actually warned like 2 or 3 times. Evelyn Ray says, families can't even have this many people attend a loved one's funeral. She's talking about the number of cops. Yeah, there's more people helping a homeless woman move on than can go to a funeral.
Dave, people have misunderstood what's going on here. Victorian police required 8 officers because the first 7 in attendance couldn't get their phone cameras working to share pics of the homeless woman on WhatsApp.
I read you tweet that earlier today. It's gold then, it's gold now. I only wish I had said it first. Look, if you scrutinize my Twitter timeline close enough, James, you'll see I've regurgitated some of the things you've tweeted in my own little words. You're very inspiring. So Eli said, that's scary, Dave. I think we've gone too far. McGowan over here in the West is acting like a dictator. There you go. Marcus, a fellow sand groper. Fiona says, how can we detach Victoria from Australia and set it out? Look, it's not just... It was Queensland. I was up at a lookout and I was doing a recording for a church service, which is allowed. It's a workplace. And then I just called the local station and said, hey, if you get some complaints, I'm here doing the right thing for the right reason. And he said, yeah, that's fine. And then he tried to recruit me to make complaints about the other people that were there to watch the sunset. I'm like, I'm just not going to be part of that. I don't want to cause trouble. I just want to do what I have to do and go. I appreciated they were going to be supportive of what we had to do. But, like, seriously, is that really the most important thing police have to do right now, is shoo people away from a lookout who are watching sunset? To me, it just seems ignorant. Evelyn Ray says cops are fantastic. Amen. I agree. But they're shooting themselves in the foot when they do things like this. It only serves to discredit the good work they do. That's obviously the 7 people sharing their WhatsApp photos. James, you were going to jump in?
I was just going to say it's a lot easier to shoo people away from viewing a sunset than it is to catch people who are stealing cars or breaking into homes.
Yeah. Look, I'd hate to characterise cops as, and I know you don't mean this. Hands up if you don't think cops are awesome, but silence was the deafening reply. We're not trying to characterise them as lazy. Malcolm.
What about Air Force jets in Queensland? They were prevented from doing the flyover on Anzac Day because, according to, I think it was the health spokesman or the chief doctor or the health minister, I think it was the chief doctor, said that they couldn't let any exceptions through because then people would take advantage of it, and that we had to uphold the law. What a lot of rubbish, because people see that they're not going to catch a virus off a plane several thousand feet up in the air.
Yeah.
Absolute nonsense. And what they're doing is they're undermining the law themselves by coming up with such stupid nonsense.
Malcolm, Cato Bailey asks, what is everyone's thoughts on how Sweden has refused to implement the level of restriction we have and have remained open for business? Quick fly around. Everyone's thoughts on Sweden. Malcolm, starting with you.
A lot of the responses from the performance of various countries depends upon the demographics of the country. Mm-hmm. The jury is still out on Sweden because Sweden has probably got closer to herd immunity, which protects Sweden, but they've had a lot of people die. Taiwan is the standout for me, and possibly second in second place is South Korea. Taiwan focused on people's health. Number one, they didn't say balance health and economy. They said health. They went after that. And then what they did was they implemented massive testing, regular testing, and they isolated the sick and they isolated the vulnerable. The rest of them got back to work. So Taiwan's hardly missed a beat. Now, Taiwan has a similar population to ours.
Yeah.
It also has a population that is closer to China, and I would believe that it has much more contact with China, flights either directly or indirectly. So they had much earlier contact with the virus than we did. Similar population, as I've said, 24 million versus our 25. And in the time we've had almost 100 deaths, they've had six, and haven't missed a beat. They're the standout. South Korea let it get away from them. They were following Italy's path. They very quickly got it under control following Taiwan's strategy. And they've got about double the deaths we have, I think, but a population that is more than double ours. And they got to let it get away from them, and they recovered. So I think Taiwan and South Korea are the standouts, and following close behind would be Israel, because they have put into isolation people who are above 70 or who are vulnerable to certain morbidities. And then they have put different rankings on people with various vulnerabilities, obesity, diabetes, heart problems, etc., respiratory problems. And people under 30, completely free. Just go to it. And that's exactly what we should be doing in terms of separating and isolating the vulnerable, the sick, and then letting the rest get back to work. So we have done a great job health-wise. We've done a lousy job economically, and that's because we didn't have a clear objective at the start.
Are any of the panelists aware of the statistics in Africa? I heard something today, and I'm not confident on the stats, but I heard something along the lines of they've got very, very, very low results.
That's true.
Very low fatalities.
There have been relatively few cases in Africa, and I'm speculating here, but I think it's probably because the average age in Africa is much lower than places like Italy, and the virus seems to affect the elderly much more than it does younger people, as Malcolm was just saying. So an intelligent response would take that into account. Now, just on the government's handling of it, I'm not against the government taking action to protect health or anything like that. I am concerned about what I see as an overreach of powers. And I'm particularly concerned that once the government starts exercising these powers, they won't hand them back. I'm concerned we'll see more shutdowns over various things in the future when there's no need for it. And the other thing that's very frustrating is just the inconsistency with things. So, I want to go to church on Sunday. I'm happy to go to church where they have rules that say only a certain number of people can be in a certain area.
Yep.
Fine with that, but we can't go to church at all. But if we wanted to go to the adult shop, for instance, down the road, we could all cram in there. We could all cram into Bunnings or Woolworths. The only thing that the reason churches are closed is because they're not selling anything. But just because you sell something doesn't make you immune to coronavirus. It's just inconsistent.
Yep. No, I completely agree, and I think it's a tyranny. I don't think tyranny's hyperbole, and I don't mean it as hyperbole. It's utterly ridiculous that we've been denied the freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom of religion in this, and I don't think there's any evidence that it was ever justified beyond people with a few letters after their name saying so. The same kind of people who predicted there would be 1.5 million deaths in America and 500,000 deaths in England when they're not even going to get to 20, which is a bad flu season.
Well, and Dave, the other thing is, and Malcolm touched on this with the lack of the Air Force flyover for Anzac Day. I mean, that is just a very silly decision made by people who I think are running with all the power they can get at the moment to make any decision they want. So all that's going to do over time is undermine even more trust in our institutions, trust in the Defence Force, trust in the Chief Health Officer, trust in the police force. I mean, if the police are being kebab police or beach police or sunset police, over time, the local population or local average Australian is going to lose confidence in their police force.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting, Dave. I read an article on the weekend, or skimmed an article on the weekend from Florida. And Florida has got a large age population. It's also got a large young population. And they're expecting a mess in Florida, just like New York. But they haven't had it because the elderly have been quite smart and locked themselves up. And the rest have got on with sensible precautions which vary from county to county. Because the people know themselves.
Yep. Marcus seems to be having trouble with his internet. You're in and out, Marcus. Welcome back again.
Yeah, I just keep dropping out. It's annoying. So about this COVID-19, I go back to what Marcus said about Taiwan. They actually warned the WHO about atypical pneumonia. They sent a letter to WHO about it. They then published it, but they worked quickly to contain stem the virus, and I think Taiwan has done a really good job. It's really sad you don't hear about it. We don't hear about what Taiwan has done. I wrote an article about this, but and in South Korea, the liberal left Moon government actually got re-elected with a majority because of their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it's time for Australia to get rid of the lockdown. It's funny how Victoria has the harshest lockdown, yet the cases are still rising. Yet in other states, the cases are dropping or have been at zero. So it's kind of like, what's the point of lockdown?
It's the same in New Zealand. Their lockdown was far worse than ours and a slightly higher mortality rate.
I mean, I'm doing my TAFE classes online, and I'd rather go back to TAFE. So, we need to get our lockdown ended. So I downloaded the app because I want to get back to normal. I think 5 million has already downloaded. Just send us back. We shouldn't be like this. Although I watched a video the other day on Twitter, Professor Brian Cox. He praised this lockdown because it was good for the climate or the environment because all the animals are coming back. And this is what they want. This is the climate emergency. This is what they want. All of us locked down in our houses. No cars on roads. No planes flying in the sky. It's just it's madness. But I'm more concerned about the economic science of things.
Let's come to economics in a
I
second.
think tertiary settles.
I just want to have a look at this tweet here. So I'm just going to expand this a little. John Ruddick has tweeted, 7% of Aussies think we've overreacted. Only 7% of Aussies think we've overreacted regarding the virus. Who are the 7%? The libertarian right. The same guys and gals who A, championed the crusade against communism in the 20th century, and B, gave us and the world in recent decades the greatest prosperity the world has ever known. I confess I'm one of the 7%. Furthermore, I'm shocked it's not 70%. However, I've got some interesting information today from my accountant. NAB Markets Research reports Apple geolocation data suggests Australians have behaved similarly to countries with more restrictive lockdowns. This point is brought home by Sweden, which did not adopt formal containment measures, but where activity is contracting at the same rate as other advanced economies. My opinion is government should always have asked nicely, made a case, and trusted us without vilifying dissenters and protected liberty. So despite not having the same lockdowns, we're having the same, according to Apple geolocation data, we're having the same kind of movement as people in Sweden with very different results. It's maybe not a entirely scientific study, Malcolm, but it does tend to support what you were saying, that it's got a lot more to do with other factors than government regulations.
Yes, the demographics are really important. Italy has very close-knit families. They have 3 generations in some households. One person goes out, a healthy young person goes out to the supermarket, catches coronavirus, brings it back, and wipes out the elderly. So that's one outlook there. But I think this quarantine is needed. But we need to quarantine the right people, which is the sick and the vulnerable, and then the rest get on with work. Human economies depend upon human interactions. You shut down interactions, you lose the economy. We have to maintain the interactions while minimizing the risk. That's easy. Isolate the sick, isolate the vulnerable, and then let the rest get back on with it. And institute a testing program, just like Taiwan, just like South Korea, just like Israel. These are the keys. And I think there's also another message too, Dave, for me. Leadership is not about saying 6 months hibernation, 6 months hibernation, 6 months hibernation. That doesn't give hope. People want hope, and people see hope when someone tells them the truth. Instead of saying what has happened, we need people who will say, here's the data, here's the plan for the future, here's when we can expect things to get back to normal. We don't have that. We have seen very little trust of the people because no data has been shared. The guts of the modeling hasn't been shared. And when governments stop trusting the people will eventually stop trusting government. And that's so important, because government is there because of the people. It is there to serve the people. It is there only with the permission of the people. And government in this country, and I'm talking about both the main parties, both the title parties, they need to remember that politicians are here to serve the people, not to manipulate the people.
Stephen Kyler asks a really great question. I'd like to take the conversation here. Will the Australian economy be the future pandemic that will become the political test of the ages? Malcolm, I know you just spoke and I'd like to share it around, but I'm actually really interested in your particular take on this. And that is, how do we recover from the CCP virus economic catastrophe?
We recover with politicians telling the truth. The fact is that we cannot recover economically without getting back to basics. Energy has to be one of the very first things resolved, and that means getting back to competitive federalism, getting back to our constitution, getting back to the cheapest electricity in the world instead of the most expensive. The second thing we need to do is we need to restore our sovereignty, economic sovereignty, our governance. Instead of having so much red tape, green tape, and blue tape, which is UN tape, we need to get rid of a lot of those regulations that have come in.
Haven't heard of that one before, blue tape.
Because of, well, you were hearing a lot more about it. A lot of our green tape comes from blue tape, actually, Dave.
We need it. Need that word.
So we also need infrastructure. We need water. Government has to realize that it needs to provide the environment in which people want to invest. Only investors who have businesses create jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. It creates a bureaucracy that saps the wealth of the country. We need to do these basic things that restore our productive capacity and restore our economic resilience. They've been smashed by basically the stealing of our energy, the stealing of our water, the stealing of our land, and the over-regulation. You know, the Whigs, I read a wonderful book a few years ago. The Whig Party came to power in 1840, and I might have these figures wrong, but roughly 18,000 regulations. The Whigs abolished 14,000. And little England in 50 years became Great Britain. I mean, it gives me goosebumps to feel that, but that's what people need. They need to be freed, not enslaved to government, but enabled by government. But the basic freedoms need to be restored, and that's the big issue here.
Bernard, what are your thoughts on economic recovery?
Thanks, Dave. I've got to go in about 5 minutes, so I'll leave it after this. It's going to be difficult. If you just think about the fact that unemployment benefits have been doubled, I think, and we've got the JobKeeper payments. Malcolm said we need politicians who can speak the truth, and we do, but I find it hard to see a way forward where the Liberal Party or the Labor Party is going to have the courage to start reducing these benefits into the future. And I'm very concerned that our society has become, we've been using the word interdependent, where individuals are now dependent on the governments for everything, including the ability to go shopping or down the streets, it seems now. We can't go without permission of the governments. We won't have an economic recovery until those issues are very firmly addressed, and we move back to normality. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of people who have got positions of influence and power at the moment actually like this type of society. They want society like this all the time, and you only have to look at the chief health or the deputy chief health officer's tweets from Victoria to understand that there's a lot more than just medical thought going into the restrictions at the moment, and there's a whole bunch of other ideological thought behind these restrictions. So get rid of the restrictions as soon as we can. Protect those who need it, and let the rest of us get on with living. You can't avoid death by giving up living. That's what I say, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Bernard, and good luck with Mark Latham's bill.
See you, Bernard.
See ya.
Awesome. I'm going to try and find that tweet because that's, oh, here we go. Found it. All right, let's have a look at this perler. I said never ever trust a government expert who has admitted political and policy agendas, confesses to toxic feminism, believes in forcing equal outcomes, and has to tell you her biological sex while calling Australian hero Captain James Cook an invading genocidal terrorist. So Dr. Anneliese van Diemen said, Doctor, she's got letters after her name, she must be credible. Sudden arrival of an invader from another land, decimating populations, creating terror, forces the population to make enormous sacrifices and completely change how they live in order to survive. COVID-19 or Cook 1770. And then...
Question for you, Dave.
Yeah.
Is Dr. Van Diemen going to change her name to something other than foreign invader and call herself Dr. Gondwana Land?
It's a very colonial imperialist name, isn't it?
She has pronouns in her bio as well. She has pronouns in her bio. She's one of to always have pronouns in their bio. Oh my God.
Hey, James, respond to this. I'm amazed and shocked that there are Christians and conservatives who will argue theological deference to government authority, because they do, and I agree 100%, they do have an authority and a mandate from God to protect citizens. to protect the citizens and from wrongdoers and so on. And yet we can be so incurious about the agendas and details behind some of these people who are issuing these things without even questioning what else they're trying to implement and what else they believe and where they're coming from. Your thoughts?
Well, I think arguing for deference to government is not arguing for theology. It's just arguing for laziness. To be able to think and question is part of being human, and to question the government is our responsibility. So people who talk like that, I'm not quite sure where they're getting it from, other than they're intellectually lazy, and it's easier just to say, well, the Bible says we should obey the government, so let's just obey. I think that's just an excuse for intellectual laziness, to be honest.
Harsh but fair. It's one of my brother's sayings. I love it. It's just, we work in so many situations. Harsh but fair. Malcolm, I know neither of you two Bible-believing Christians, if that's fair, while still having a respect for Malcolm, in your case, the wisdom of Jesus. But any thoughts on on the deference a citizen should have to the respect? And I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm trying to be quite sincere, actually. What is the right level of respect and cooperation with government authorities?
I think the American Declaration of Independence summarized it pretty well. And they said that essentially that it is the duty of a citizen to overthrow the government if the government stops serving the people. That's not the words. Thomas Jefferson wrote most of it, and he did it much more eloquently. I subscribe to that. The government is there only because they've been given the power by the people. If they abuse that power, and then these days the Liberal-Labor duopoly has been in power now since the 1950s, and there's so little difference in their policies. I made a list of 31 policies that are severely crippling Queensland in the rural sector, and 29 of them are shared by both the Liberal Party, National Party, and the Labor Party. Two of them, the other two, are solely Labor. But we're facing a real problem here, and the number one problem in this country is government. It's over-governed. We've got far too much centralised power. If you go back to this, rebuilding the Federation, that shows how the UN has come in and stolen our governance, and it's done through the Liberal Party and Labor Party implementing UN policies. It's that simple. There's no secret here. And what we've done is we've centralized government, and yet our forefathers said that the best, they didn't say this explicitly, but they certainly meant it, the best form of government is small government, because the people are the engine room. So the way to do that is to get government back to the states, which is where it was in the first place. The same with the American Constitution. It's overreach of central government that is destroying our country. Because the central government, because it's Labor and Labor, they're the same thing basically. And you look at most of their policies, they just vary they're so similar, they vary in extremeness. That's all. If you have only the central government doing most of the work, then you've got no competition, no accountability. But at the states, if you have the Liberal Party, if you have, say, South Australian destroying their energy sector, you have businesses leaving the state and going to other states. Then South Australians start waking up, and that's the whole reason for our competitive federalism, our federation. That's extremely important. The best form of government is a small form of government. We need some government, but we've got to keep it small, and especially central government. Central government should do very, very little. I reckon the Parliament in Canberra should sit very rarely and have very little to do, and just get rid of most of it.
Yeah, well, I'd like them to see adopting Trump's policy of abolishing 2 regulations for every new regulation. That would be good. Marcus, tell me, as a conservative enthusiast, did the founders of the Australian Constitution and the American Constitution envisage a people that served the government, or did they set up in foresight and wisdom of future governments of unknown character, checks, limits, balances, and very firm restrictions on the size and power of government?
This is a bit hard. I'm pretty sure they, we definitely knew we had to have some form of government, but I think they didn't envisage a government that will just slowly increase and grow over the years, over the decade. I mean, one of my pet hates is that we have departments in Canberra that belong to state governments. We have environment, we have health, we have education, and it seems a bit ridiculous. I mean that's why people get so confused over, like when we had the bushfire season, they were like, why isn't the federal government fighting the fires? Well, that's the state government responsibility. Why do we have a national cabinet? Isn't health meant to be state responsibility? And that's the thing, you get local governments, which are the worst kind of government, which just abolish local governments. There's local governments, state governments, and federal governments. There's no difference between them because, the state government responsibilities are going to federal government. And you see Daniel Andrews signing the One Vote, One Vote initiative. He's the state government, state premier. He's not the federal government. He's not the foreign minister. He's not the prime minister. So you have all these layers of government just overlaying each other, and you wonder why we're in such a mess, because you have local, state, and federal. People don't know the difference, and that's because they've just overlapped each other. Peter Cratton once said to get rid of state governments. I entertained the idea of just getting rid of all the governments and then having the federal government, the government that way. But I don't know. It's just a mess. But we've got to do something.
It's a common thought that people wanting to reduce the level of quantity is probably the right word. The quantity of government in Australia are actually suggesting to get rid of state governments, and I assume they want to just end up with federal governments, like you were just saying. But I want to point you to federalism. What our founding fathers saw was a system of competing states, independent sovereign colonies, collaborating together where necessary, but competing against each other. And it was very important for the sake of other things which we've achieved. For example, the reason we don't have death duties and estate taxes in Australia is because one innovative premier by the name of Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen defied all the economic experts who said he would ruin the state's economy if he abolished that very, very, very important and lucrative revenue source. And he defied them all and said, forget about it. We're going to get rid of death duties. And slowly but surely, all the business people from around Australia who stood to pay the governments in other states large amounts of money, brought their businesses, brought their jobs, brought their industry, brought their wealth and their spending to Queensland. And other states saw that it was actually increasing Queensland's revenue. And they had to remain competitive by copying Queensland's abolition of taxes. And so I would urge you against ever recommending the abolition of states and winding up with just a federation.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Perhaps just get rid of local governments, the councils. I think they're the.
I don't think it's the structures that are the problem. I think it's the nature, the personality, and the inclination to hire more public servants over and over.
Especially in Queensland.
And you know what it is? It's my fault. It's the voters' faults. The reason we have too much government in Australia is because we have voters who keep voting in pork barrelling promises. And every pork barrelling promise is another bureaucrat, another government department, another increase to the budget, which results in increased taxes and drains on public servants. We've got more government because we keep asking for more government. It's not a problem with the layers or structure. that's fine. It's the problem with us being reliant on government instead of ourselves.
Can I,
James, sorry.
When James is finished, because I've got a couple of stats that you might be very interested in, Marcus and Dave.
I was just going to say that the bigger question here is how you regard human nature. Do you believe that people are basically intelligent and able to work out what's best for themselves? If that's what you believe about human nature, then you would be in favor of small government. We trust people to figure out what works for them and to go on and do it. On the other hand, if you believe that people are too stupid to know what's good for them, then you are going to want bigger government to look after people and to provide for them what they are either incapable or too stupid to provide for themselves. And so this argument about small government versus big government is really not so much an argument about government as an argument about human nature itself and the way we view people. That to me is the biggest question here.
Yep. Malcolm.
Yeah, that's very profound. I agree with you, and I'll come back to what Jefferson said in a little bit. But on page 10 of Rebuilding the Federation, it says, this is the Liberal Premier, remember, 1994, says the driving feature of Commonwealth state financial relations is the state's heavy reliance on Commonwealth funding to supplement their own source revenue. Currently, that's 1994, the states receive approximately 50% of their total revenue from the Commonwealth. And to get that revenue, they have to comply with conditions. So who's really running the states? The federal government. In February 2017, I was at St. George in southwestern Queensland, and I had a meeting with the Balonne Shire Council. And we just asked a simple question. What percentage of the Balonne Shire Council's annual revenue comes from the federal government? It'd be interesting for me to just pause a minute and ask people to think what it would be, what they guess. The answer is 73%.
Wow.
But there's something more insidious, and that is that each of those, all of the money comes with conditions. It's usually grants. But the next thing is that those grants have a finite life. So it might be 3-year grant, 5-year grant. And what happens is then the Balonne Shire Council can't plan for more than that. And so we have a lack of planning in the councils. But again, the federal government is running the councils because they dictate the conditions. In 1943, we had a terrible decision from the High Court when it upheld the Commonwealth government's stealing of the income tax powers from the state governments. We would be in far better shape if the Australian state governments controlled their destiny and paid a little bit, let them control the funding, the raising of taxes, and then send some money to the federal government for defence, foreign affairs, maybe communication oversight, defence, foreign affairs, there's another one in there I'm thinking of, border protection, fundamental things of a federal government. Get the rest back to the states. Yep. Get the rest all back to the states and stop the duplication.
Yeah, excellent. No, and I'd like to see. I don't want to get too bogged down on this topic, but in Queensland, we don't have an upper house in the state government. Yeah. And when the suggestion, it's thought to be politically too hard to reintroduce it and have an accountable parliament again. We have mandatory 4-year dictatorships at the moment, democratically elected dictatorships, but still they have a blank check to do whatever they want, constitution and high court challenges pending. But I'm not an appreciator of a unicameral parliament. But the opposition to reintroducing an upper house is essentially this fear of more government. And it's actually quite easy to have the same or less number of politicians implemented. But the whole fear is government interference. The number of politicians is it's just a random, abstract, arbitrary number. What's too much? What's too little? It doesn't really matter. What actually matters is where the rubber hits the road. Get the government hand out of my pocket, out of my wallet, out of my life, out of my church, And I don't care if you've got 1,000 politicians or 2. I just don't want to know about you. I just don't want to. No offense, Malcolm. Thank you for the wonderful job you do.
No, I'm loving what you're saying. I really am. We need more people saying this. I'm not alone.
But I appreciate you not taking it personally.
No,
and it's not personal.
I agree.
I think politicians are public servants, and I appreciate the sacrifice. And one of the things I hate is calls for or resentment of a politician's pay. And I don't think it's enough to incentivize me to get into the job. So thank you for doing it. But yeah, look, it's a very different matter from the concept of government. And, it's just fantastic that we have the ability to say, look, our constitution was designed as a restraint on the increase and ever growing creep of the power and reach of government, and that's exactly what they did intend. So I respect those authorities. Can
we come back to something James said?
Yeah, please.
Because Thomas Jefferson, I believe from reading some of his work, showed that he had a belief that humans are wonderful. And I happen to think that humans are fabulous. However, human behavior and the human condition leads some to want control over others. And that the ego takes prominence in those people. The majority of people just want to get on with life. And sadly, government is necessary to protect life, protect property, and protect freedoms. But it has to be limited. Unfortunately, government is a vehicle for the unworthy to take over control over the worthy. That's the history. And Jefferson knew that. And Jefferson looked at Europe and he could see hundreds of years of that kind of nonsense, causing war, causing famine, causing idleness. And Jefferson and his compatriots came up with an amazing constitution which laid the foundation for ours. And ours is better, I think. But
I agree.
There is that.
It wasn't foresight, it was hindsight.
Yeah, there is that need to limit the control of government, because so many people see government, politics as a vehicle for getting control, looking after their own pocket. That's what has to be stamped out, because what we have to do is realize, exactly as you said, government is here to serve the people, and people are wonderful. Just get the government out of their way.
Yep.
It's a great paradox, isn't it? Because from a Christian point of view, we would say we live in a fallen world, if you understand what I mean by that we are made in God's image, but we are fallen. And so it's because we live in a fallen world that we need a government, but it's because we live in a fallen world that we've got to restrict that government and keep it small. So it's this paradox. We need a government, but we've got to keep that government small. And that's a tension that needs to be managed very carefully and requires some nuance.
I'm a big fan of God's work in the way he set up government in the Garden of Eden. He gave us freedom of will. He gave us the knowledge of right and wrong. He gave Adam and Eve a command, and he gave them the freedom to either love his commands or reject them, and with his commands, him. With this understanding, we have this great liberty that at every stage, God has valued free will above the absence of evil. And it's a profound thought. We think about the evil in the world, and it's a profound philosophical thought. We're getting deep right now, but why does God allow suffering, sickness, kids to get cancer and things like that? And the bottom line, without trying to be simplistic, is that if God was to mandate his will from the beginning to the end, he would have never had anybody loving him. They would have just been programmed. And so if we value freedom, then we should value sometimes that people won't do what we want with that freedom. So, in Sweden, people are having the same kind of movements as Australians are having, but in Sweden, they're doing it with liberty. because they're being responsible with that. And their government trusted that some people won't follow the rules, but this will create a better society with far less economic vandalism than Australia has at the end of the day.
I think in a country where most people drive Volvos, they were always going to be very.
But you know who makes Volvos? The Chinese own it. The Chinese make Volvos in China. I'm serious.
If that's not irony upon irony.
But you know, Dave, the universe has the perfect accounting system.
So true.
And you know that. And we reap what we sow.
Yep.
And that comes back to us in many, many different ways, sometimes physically, sometimes spiritually, but it comes back because the universe's accounting system is the perfect accounting system.
Yeah, indeed. Paul Cleary asks, who are the speakers? I see Dave Pellowe and Malcolm Roberts. Well, we also have Bernard Gaynor, who was here and had to leave. He was at the beginning of the video, Paul. And we've got Marcus Fu in the bottom left, whose Twitter hashtag is not his Twitter handle is A Stronger Oz, OZ. And we also have James McPherson, which is his Twitter handle in the bottom right-hand corner. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in, Paul. Let's bring this plane into land. Not that planes are allowed to fly anywhere at the moment, but are there any final questions, comments from the viewers, and any other last? Maybe we'll give it another 3 to 5 minutes. This sounds a little bit ethno. Grady says because the Swedish are largely a single ethnicity. I don't know that the rape gangs parading the country would agree with that. But that's a different topic. Yeah. Any Malcolm, have you got a suggestion for the last 3 minutes?
No, I just perhaps could start off a conversation by saying that today, one of my staff who happens to live and work in Canberra, he said that today is the coldest May day in Canberra ever. Did anyone hear that on the ABC?
You mean it's not warming?
So, no, but they don't report the cold because that's the problem with the media. They push many in the media. Sorry, James. They push an ideology, and that's so important for our freedom to get away from that media and to come to places like this, because this may be just exchanges of opinion, but at least it's speaking up, as Marcus, James, yourself, Dave, and Bernie, and I have all advocated to change this country. We need to speak up. We need to support each other.
Hey, on that note, it's a perfect opportunity for me to segue into an ad for Sanctity of Life Sunday. So one of my conservative heroes is Ronald Reagan, and in 1984, he instituted Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. And he did that on the American anniversary of the legalization of abortion across that great nation. A tragic day in their history. And he decided to build a monument to the sanctity of human life on that anniversary to try and change the culture. And so we're going to take another step in that direction. But rather than waiting for a Ronald Reagan figure, we the people, grassroots, are going to make this our national day on the anniversary of the legalization of abortion in Australia. And that is the 26th of May, 1969. So Sanctity of Life Sunday will be the Sunday nearest that date. And this year, that's the 24th of May, a day to celebrate the equal value and dignity of every human life at every stage. It's not an activism day. It's not a politically partisan day. It's not a denominational day. It's just a day where we agree with God that people are made in his image and therefore worthy of dignity, respect, and equal human rights at every single stage of their existence, development, and in every circumstance. You can get more information about that and how you can celebrate at sanctityoflifesunday.com.au. That's sanctityoflifesunday.com.au. Make sure you get involved in that and let's make sure that our generation ends abortion. There should be no pro-abortion candidates any more than there are pro-slavery candidates. It's a gross, obscene violation of human rights, which has terrible impacts on men and women, as well as the people that it's killing.
Yeah.
Okay, 8 comments I haven't seen. Just wrapping it up. Al Gore is in Antarctica with a hairdryer, keeping up appearances.
He's probably at a bank collecting his money.
Yeah, that's exactly. Michael Chicos says, forgive me if I'm saying that wrong. Chicos, I'm assuming it's Chicos. Type it in phonetically for me, Michael. The ABC would say the lockdown has cured climate change. I heard who's really great, Peter Hitchens. Thank you for bearing with me while I scraped the vaults of my memory. Peter Hitchens compared that claim to going to a doctor with chickenpox, walking out with an amputated leg and the doctor expecting you to thank him for curing chickenpox. So that's a good one. Fatima. Mount Gower, I don't know what your name is, but talk about Fatima or privatized central banking for 3 minutes. That sounds like an impossibility. I don't even know what Fatima is in relation to banking and finance. Is that a challenge for you, Malcolm?
It could well be. I think he's talking about FATCA, which is the I can't remember what it stands for now, but it's essentially the taxing of Americans by their citizenship, whereas every other country except America taxes people by their residency. So what that means is American citizens living and working in Australia, even if they're dual citizens like an Australian citizen, they have to pay tax in America as well as in Australia. Oh. And because the Americans treat superannuation funds differently, what we call superannuation funds differently from the way in America from the way we treat them, it means that something going into the way we handle super in this country puts an extra tax burden on the people who have got that dual citizenship. And it really is grossly unfair. It's a huge overreach of the Internal Revenue Service. It is beyond belief. Some of the things that are going on, my wife has received letters, so I've got to declare a conflict of interest, so to speak, there in this topic. Just absolutely stunning. I mean, wow. It comes out of an authoritarian state, a totalitarian state, denial of justice. There are about 8 million Americans around the world up really agitated about this. It's killing progress in terms of companies overseas. My wife can't be a director, otherwise she's up for liability depending upon what the company does. And it's really hideous stuff. It's totalitarian, no doubt about it. And American legislators are having enormous trouble reining it in, and some of them are starting to sniff it and starting to push it more heavily, but it's difficult.
Mount Gower has said, no, that's not what he's talking about. Wrong. Fatima, Portugal, and you know what it is.
Fatima, Portugal. Give me more hints, Mount.
Yeah, and sorry for assuming your gender, Mount Gower.
Well, you could get it right, one or two. It's one of two, isn't it? Well, maybe it's not.
The closest thing I'm finding is a place, a city in the municipality of Urem in Portugal. So it's a town. Something to do with central banking.
Dave, someone's just said Fatima is the 3 children visited by Mother Mary.
Yeah, well, there's that as well, but I don't know that relates to Portugal. Mount Gower says just go with the banking system. All right. Well, anyway, I think we've exhausted that for the evening. I'm impressed we've still got so many people sticking with us. Thank you all, and this is just great fun. It's great fun hanging out with you. We're very privileged to have a federal senator join us and make himself available. And Terry, among other people in the comments, is saying, thanks for tonight's show, gentlemen. And thank you to the panelists and thank you to the viewers for joining us. This is a whole heap of fun. Let's get this trending. Let's get this big and built, not Q&A. the solution for all things Monday night on hashtag their ABC.
Yeah.
And thank you to you, Dave, for doing it.
My pleasure. It's a team sport, so that'll be lots of fun. Okay, hang on. We've got somebody who's paid $2 to get a question in, which is very generous. So we'll whip around this and then say goodnight. Port Film Co-op, free ad for $2. What is your favorite Jean-Claude Van Damme movie?
I've never heard of that before.
Oh, that's
I've never heard of that before.
I've met him and I heard he's big, but I honestly can't recognize and remember a movie name with Jean-Claude Van Damme in it.
That's
he was great in was it Twilight?
You have just isolated yourself from millions of young girls. Millions.
So this is Jean-Claude Van Damme photos. 6 bullets.
Oh no, I was thinking of Dr. Van Damme.
Kill 'em all. Van Damme 5. The Expendables. Oh, look, how can you go past The Expendables? That's where I'm going to stop. That was a great movie. Is it fair to call it a Van Damme movie if he only appeared in it? I'm gonna
running the show.
Yeah, well, well, it's not my question, but yeah, I'm gonna stick with those. The Expendables movies, never a sequel, always the original, number one. And James, are you gonna stick with Twilight?
Yeah, I'm sticking with that.
Okay, I hope that was a well spent $2. Thank you for your donation. And it was remiss of me to not say this in the first show, but thank you to the Pellowe Talk sponsors. Oh, look, we've got a few. SJ Macklin's laughing at you, Marcus. LOL, foo. Bloodsport was his favorite movie. Joan White says Kickboxer. Port Film Co-op won't pay for other comments. Time Cop, Bloodsport, Hard Target, Kickboxer, Legionnaire. Oh, that was a good movie. March or Die.
Yeah, I've never heard of any of these.
Love your honesty.
Yeah, that's right. Hard Target. Well, there we go. Some compulsory viewing if you get sick of Michael Moore documentaries, which is a topic maybe for next week. All right. Love your work, gentlemen. Good night. And we'll see everybody next week in the comments at 8 p.m. on Tuesday because it's hashtag not Q&A.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you so much.